Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello and welcome to Fired Up, the startup marketing podcast. My name is Morgan McClintock and I'm joined today by my co-host Ian Lipner.
How's it going today, Morgan?
It's going well. How are you?
Doing great. Excited to hear what we've got in store here. I know today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, PR measurement. We're going to think about how people track for media coverage, what they think about modern analytics, what's missing in the landscape today, and more. And we've got a special guest today to help us with this.
Yes, we are joined by Richard Bagnall, who's a global leader in the field of PR, communications measurement and evaluation for over 30 years, working with international clients. He's been actively involved with AMEC, which is the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communications, for those that don't know, since its inception. And he recently chaired the organization for 6 years. Whilst he was at AMEC, he led the development of the Integrated Evaluation Framework, which is a comms measurement process, now acknowledged as global best practice. And during his career, he's led some of the world's top measurement agencies, including Metrica, Gorkana, Prime Research, and CARMA, where he is currently the global co-managing partner. He's advised the UK Government Cabinet Office Strategy and Evaluation Council for 10 years. And his work has earned him a number of Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the CIPR's President Medal, Amec's Don Bartholomew Medal, and induction into the USA's PR News Measurement Hall of Fame. So suffice to say, Richard is Mr. Measurement, and this is Amec's Measurement Month. So Richard, welcome to Fired Up.
Morgan, Ian, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to join.
Great to have you. So I want to kick off with something topical. And over here, there's a PR tool called MuckRack. And it, like many companies, has just added some artificial intelligence capabilities to its platform. And this one is a coverage spike report. And basically, it's a tool that uses AI and machine learning to monitor media sources across digital, broadcast, podcast, newsletters, print. And it'll analyze those trends and tell you if you suddenly have a sudden spike in coverage so that you can do something about it. I think BuzzSumo's had something fairly similar for a number of years. I guess I wanted to kick off by saying, hey, how do you think that AI is impacting PR measurement?
The pace of development and change at the moment is hugely exciting. And MuckRack is great friends of AMEC's, members of AMEC, and friends of mine as well. The guys do fantastic work, and their coverage spike looks really interesting. I think it's threshold alerts. I think it also recommends journalists. They talk about in their release that it's using AI. I think really it's using machine learning and technology. And of course, the industry's been on a journey of using technology more and more and more over the years that I've been in the comms evaluation space. When I began, it was Excel sheets. It was I exchanged data with a colleague on floppy disks. Would you believe we didn't even have a network? I remember one of our colleagues, one of our business partners saying, we're not going to have a network. They're too unreliable. How the world has changed in a short quarter of a century. Technology like threshold alerts, that's built into many tools that I know, including CARMA's own media insight tool as well.
So you just alluded to it, started out measurement using spreadsheets, but now, really being the forefront of this industry, really are the go-to authority on this. So for those that don't know you, how did you get here?
Gosh, well, I was lucky. I worked in PR and comms myself. I worked at Saatchi's PR agency, and I also worked in-house for a period. Mixed success. Enjoyed some of the jobs more than others. but knew that PR was the space that I wanted to be in. Had absolutely zero interest in measurement. I'm a PR guy. I'm a comms guy. Like I think many in our industry, I thought that numbers wasn't really for me. And, that was for the data wonks. Actually, what happened, my first sort of exposure to this, I was doing some work with one of our clients at the agency, and it was a huge launch of the first lottery in the UK back in the 90s. And it dominated the media landscape. And we used to get these coverage reports, and every number was massive. And we used to march in to see the client, and the client was always delighted because we had all these big numbers. And I remember one particular week, there was an issue when the client said, well, look, hold on, we've had a load of negative coverage because people have been saying that because people are going to buy lottery tickets, they're not going to give money to charities. How have you accounted for this in this report? And you can't tell me all this is good. This is actually bad for us. And I thought, well, hold on, there's something in here and I need to pay more attention. Fast forward about a year, and I met a gentleman who frankly changed my life, someone called Mark Westerby, who had just invented a new measurement system. It was the early days of PR measurement, and I was stuck in my in-house job that I basically wasn't enjoying. And Mark gave me an opportunity to get back into an agency environment. We were part of a bigger PR agency. Our measurement company was embryonic inside this PR agency. It was in Covent Garden. I met Mark. We had a couple of beers. I thought, this is more me. And I took the job. I got it the next day. I turned up to my first day and I suddenly realized, what have I done? These guys are talking about measurement concepts that I don't understand. And I very quickly thought, I'm going to have to learn about measurement, but if I'm going to learn it, I have to make it the human face of measurement. Measurement was too complicated in those days. It was old men with white beards. It was algorithms. It was secret sources. It was proprietary approaches. It was weird indexes. There was no consistency. And I thought, we can make this work if we can just make it real and come to life for people. And that's what we did at Metrico. And that's how we grew from startup to the world's largest business in that space. And then obviously my career has stayed for the last, 27, 28 years running measurement businesses.
We work with a lot of startups, and when you're implementing PR programs for them, they always want to know how you measure it. So why don't we start right at the beginning? Like, why is it so hard to measure PR after all this time? Why is it so hard?
Well, if you look at the history of PR measurement, it began as media content analysis. So back in those days of paper clippings, there'd been monitoring companies, they'd send the clips over to us. We'd then measure the clips. And actually in the early days, you'd even have things like column inches as metrics people were using, of course, the dreaded AVE, the advertising value equivalent. But it was all about what we call now the counts and amounts, or what we also call the output metrics. It's the stuff that the media content has output effectively. The problem is that all of that stuff doesn't talk to the actual value of your work. It's just stuff. It's just noise. When you're looking to measure the value of PR and comms, it's about understanding what it's done to support the organizational objectives. So an organization that's in startup mode obviously has got a big challenge to drive awareness, reputation, propensity to buy, whatever it might be, stuff very much at the top of the funnel, but also perhaps to drive sales leads, depending what it is that their startup's about. And that's where the challenge really becomes, because there are many things that make us change our minds or buy things. There are many different influences on us, and PR is often not the only one. And so there's that whole challenge of disaggregating it. So people say, well, this is too difficult. Because it's too difficult, I'm not going to do it. They kind of make an excuse. They kind of lean back from it, and they say it should be somebody else's problem to fix and to solve. And I think that's a very dangerous place for them to be. So they think that the impacts are intangible. They come up with excuses like, well, it's a long-term benefit, and advertising and other marketing disciplines are measured on a short-term sort of impact basis. And I think they allow complexity to get in the way of actually telling a decent measurement story, which shouldn't be that difficult to do. We have to just think about metrics in buckets. Outputs being those content evaluation metrics that we've always done, but then thinking about what we call outtakes, basically what people now think, having read, seen, watched, heard your content, what do they now think? And then the outcomes, having thought about it, what have they now done? And the organizational objectives always lie in the what people think and what people do part, and not in the just do more stuff for me. No one likes a busy fool, particularly in today's environment where the economies and geopolitical situations are so challenging.
You started in talking a little bit there about some of those key terms that are recognizable across the industry, maybe part of the Barcelona principles. Can you talk us through that framework and why that matters for folks?
So I can tell you a story about AMEC, first of all. My business partner, the same chap who took me for a beer and converted me from a PR man, poacher to gamekeeper, brought me into measurement. He said to me back in 1996, he said, look, there's this fledgling professional trade association being started in the UK called AMEC, and I think we should be members. And I said, all right, what's it going to be? And he said, well, it's 5 of us getting together, and I want to help everyone to be better. And I was, at that point, I was the business development manager. And I was like, what? Sorry, why are we going to help our competitors be better? And he said, Richard, because a rising tide lifts all ships. If we can educate the market on what best practice looks like, what good approaches to measurement are, it's going to be in everybody's interest. And basically, I was very anti it, but he was the founder and I wasn't. He won. And, I always say with a big smile on my face all these years later, Mark, you were right and I was wrong, because I spent 6 years as chair of AMEC. So why do I tell you that in answer to your question about the Barcelona principles? Well, one of the first things that AMEC did, or major sort of initiatives, was the Barcelona principles. In 2010, they were originally decreed. And we brought together a number of the global trade associations, the PR associations from all sorts of different regions. So the IPR in the States, CIPR, all sorts of different ones. And we put out a load of different statements and got everybody to vote on them and say, do we agree on this? Does this make sense? And what we wanted was like a blueprint of what good practice should and shouldn't be. So the first iteration of the Barcelona Principles was created then, and there were 7 statements. I see them as like a helicopter view, a 30,000-foot view out of your window as you're flying over a city. And they talk about just some broad principles. They don't tell you how to do measurement. They tell you what it should and shouldn't be. Most famously, they are known for what I call Barcelona Principles number 5, but I don't think anyone else does, which was the one which said that advertising value equivalence is an invalid metric. It was the first time the global industry had come together and said, this metric is hocus pocus. We shouldn't be reporting it. We need to move away. But it was also talking about the importance of goal setting, of measuring outcomes and not just outputs, what I was talking about a bit earlier, this concept that organizational results should be measured, that we shouldn't just do counts and amounts in media coverage analysis, but we need to look at the quality of the coverage as well, that social media should be measured. It's not just about print and traditional media, which it was back in those days. And I think importantly that any measurement approach should be transparent and replicable. You can't have just some weird number that outputs out of a black box that has any kind of credibility. If you can't understand it and explain it, where's the credibility in that? So these were the 7 statements. We've reiterated them. We've updated them every 5 years since. So they're on their 3rd iteration now. If they had a criticism, it was that they were this 30,000-foot view. Well, that's all very well, Richard, but how do we apply that? If I'm a non-profit, I'm a startup, or if I'm the world's largest bank, how do I apply this? And that's where AMEC launched the integrated evaluation framework, which you kindly mentioned, Morgan, in my introduction, something that I led the development of. It was, how do we take this best practice and give everybody, no matter what size of organization they are, the ability to measure in a meaningful way? And that was what we created, was an interactive educational tool, basically a microsite on AMEC's site that you can go to and you can look at. It's got a sort of 7-stage process. It begins with your organizational objectives, making sure you understand them, mapping your organizational objectives with your communications objectives, so making sure those 2 things support each other. Then making sure that you have a proper plan, that you understand your benchmarks, your resourcing, what it is that you've got, what it is that you're trying to get to. Have you agreed what success looks like up front with your different stakeholders? is that achievable? Are these things what we call SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound? Have we got everyone's buy-in into this? And that's the point, by the way, where you can push back. That's the point where you can have difficult conversations with people if they've got unrealistic expectations about what PR should or shouldn't be able to do. Then the next stage is about implementing, and then it's obviously about measuring, and we measure in terms of, you've heard me say it, the outputs, linking the outtakes and the outcomes, and then threading all of that together into looking at, well, what was the organizational impact? And that has transformed the industry's ability to be able to just follow that process, to be able to tell a meaningful measurement story, no matter what size they are, no matter what budget. And it's been translated into 22 different languages. It's in use by organizations ranging from NATO and the World Bank and the United Nations at the biggest end, through to many leading commercial organizations, the auto manufacturers, but through to the smallest charities on both sides of the Atlantic as well. And it's something that I'm really proud of that AMEC has done and that I played a part in.
Yeah, it's a very robust set of principles and set of guidances. We work with a lot of startups, and they're certainly very much attracted to metrics and are interested in data. At the same time, they don't have necessarily as much data to go through. Your startup, you're not necessarily hitting all those different channels you're talking about or generating the volumes of coverage. And they're short on time. So what's the right sized way for startups to look at measurement? Is it about those objectives? Where do they start?
One of the beauties of the industry I'm in is maybe the same with your industry as well, is that one of the most common answers that I give is it depends. Depends what they're trying to do. And it depends to each and every one of them. What is it that matters to them? There's always this temptation. People want to say, what is the metric that I should be counting? Well, it depends. Depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. There's always a balancing point. If you're thinking about content evaluation metrics, of course you don't need to go to the cost of expensive monitoring and measurement services if you're only getting, a handful of clips. The best way of measuring them is read them yourself. You don't need to do anything at scale. But if we begin, and I think, Ian, you said it, if we begin with objectives in mind, which is what the AMEC framework tells us to do, what is it that we're trying to do as the organization? Why does the organization want the PR and comms support? What is it that it wants the PR and comms to achieve? Well, that's likely to be around generating further awareness, better reputation, etc. So the first thing we need to do there is to understand, well, what is the awareness level? What do people think about us? And that's going to come down to some research. It's not necessarily about media content analysis. It's about asking people. And again, depending on the organization, the size of it, the scale of it, who it's trying to sell to, it's going to depend on how we do that. We can do that from just talking to the important people through to doing more at scale market research techniques, whether that's over the web or in person, through different gaming apps. There's all sorts of techniques and technologies now to run different market research programs.
Yeah, one of the things that startup companies are very much focused on is looking at their competitive sets, right? And that can get us into a lot of sort of conversations around the concept of share of voice.
Yeah.
It's sometimes made out to be a math thing, right? You review how much quantity and quality of the competitor coverage and maybe take a look at your portion of that coverage, right? Or look at the positivity or negativity. But it takes us a lot of time to do. Some of it's pretty subjective, and we're not sure how useful it is. So what do you think about share of voice? What do you think about share of voice for startups?
Share of voice for startups, I wouldn't particularly worry about it, to be honest. It wouldn't be top of my list. I think there are many reasons, as you were alluding to, that it's not that relevant. My advice always over the last 30 years to people has been, look, let's begin with ourselves. We don't have to look at our competitor set. Let's get it right for us first, particularly if we're in a budget constrained situation. Let's worry about us. Let's worry about the job that we have to do. What are the objectives that we've got? What are the challenges that we've got to achieve? I think where share of voice, there's a lot of talk and interest around, does it have relevance in terms of, is there a correlation between share of voice in earned media and share of search online? Does share of voice drive search, and does it support search advertising? And there's some interesting research and interesting work being done by different companies at the moment that are looking at that and looking to suggest that it does, and that it actually is a multiplier on advertising effectiveness, by significant amounts. That type of stuff to me is at a complexity level that for a startup doesn't actually need to be done. I would focus on myself. I'd focus on my objectives. I'd focus on what is it I'm trying to achieve, what is realistic, and then I'd be focused on how do I measure that. And I think share of voice wouldn't be one of my top of mind metrics to be getting in there right up front. I always think that for a more mature organization, a more mature situation, share of voice does, or not share of voice, but competitive sort of horizon scanning becomes an interesting thing. And it's not just against your competitors, it's against peer groups. If you want to look at, say, ESG type issues, you might be McDonald's and you might be Coca-Cola, and you're not competitors, but it would be interesting to look at each and see what we can learn from each other. But I don't think it's necessarily relevant for a startup.
I think that's great advice. I think often it's just, as a startup, are naturally competitive with their peers. And hey, when it comes to the realm of PR, this is just another front to win. And so I want to make sure that we're increasing our share of voice compared to our competitors, because it shows that we're winning. You don't know how much time, resource, emphasis they're putting into it, but it's just another front in the competitive landscape.
But I think more than where it can be interesting is, rather than share of voice, looking at topic analysis, and you can do this over what we call spider charts. So you effectively have a wheel. You have, imagine the face of a clock, and different points around the clock face, you have different topics, and then you have percent share of voice on each topic by competitor, including yourself. And what you can often see there is a gap analysis. So you can see perhaps that competitor A is really strong around one issue and you're not there. And if you add in tone and that type of stuff, you can see, well, actually, maybe there's no point in fighting in that space. But you know what? This area over here is uncontested. And this could be an area which is really interesting. And actually, we can see that these media in our key publications, which, by the way, we must research and check are the right ones to deliver to our key audiences. There's a gap there, and these journalists have interest in it.
That could be, that could show. And you would do the same for search, quite frankly. Hey, we're strong on these keywords and our competitors are strong on these ones. So should we do anything about that? Does that matter? So there's some parallels there. So how much of a company's PR budget should they allocate to this measurement? There's lots of different, obviously you can go pretty deep on this if you want. I've heard, hey, you should spend 10% of your budget on evaluation to make sure that you're going in the right direction and things are performing. But obviously that takes away from actual execution of the program and a program too. So are there some guidelines that you have in terms of investment in this area?
A few thoughts rather than guidelines. I mean, the 10% number, I think, originated from PR Week back in the probably late 90s, early 2000s. They ran something called the Proof Campaign, and they had 10% as the sort of OO of proof. And it's a nice number. Do I know many of my clients over those 30 years that have spent 10%? No, I don't, is the truth. And I don't think they need to. But against that, I would say, we as an industry, the comms and PR industry, we have a constant chip on our shoulder that we are not as good as PR and advertising at measuring ourselves. And we don't get taken as seriously as they do. And I think part of the reason of that is that they take planning, they take insight creation, they take measurement much more seriously, and they spend more money on it. None of us would do anything if we didn't know if it was working or not. And we should spend the amount of money to know if what we're doing is making sense and is working. But I think we can do that, particularly with the way technology has moved on. I think we can do that very cost effectively.
To that point then, let's talk about the sort of PR tech stack when it comes to evaluation. And you might have a slight bias in this area. What tools would you recommend using for this, or what kind of things are on your list?
Well, I'd have to have a bias, wouldn't I? So obviously, I'd say the Karma Insight tool should be at the top of everybody's list. But no, seriously, that is a great tool, and a lot of work goes into keeping it up front. And there's a number of competing tools out there. Tools that I think people should be thinking about, particularly now, particularly in a startup environment where you're looking for low cost, no cost, that type of stuff. If you want to understand what people are thinking, and you don't want to spend money on research, one of the best ways of doing that is through Google search trends. And there are different aftermarket tools as well that can interrogate Google search trends. I think it's, a really important point. We all live our best lives on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And if you find me on Twitter, you'll see that all I ever talk about apparently is communications evaluation and PR measurement. But, there's a real me behind that persona. What do I really feel and really think? Well, you're not going to get the answer by doing social media monitoring. You're not going to get the answer by listening to media content where I appear. You're going to get the answer if you can understand what I search for on Google. What am I scared of? What am I worried about? What are you writing into your Google searches? Our real selves come out there, and Google provides lots of insights into what people in different regions are looking for at any given moment. And I think it's a really valuable and overlooked way of understanding what people are thinking. We used it in a great report that we did, which you can download on Karma's website. It's called the Karma Vaccine Report. We tracked the rollout since first proof of efficacy, and the lady was first injected in the UK with the AstraZeneca vaccine. We tracked across 10 different markets and the 4 main vaccine candidates for media content coverage, and looked at what was being said and also what people thought and what people did. And what we found was in the UK, we all rolled our sleeves up and we all marched down to the doctor's surgery, and we couldn't get the AstraZeneca vaccine into our arms quick enough. In France and Germany, 2 of the markets we looked at, where we had Mrs. Merkel and Monsieur Macron giving out conflicting messaging around the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine. When we looked at Google search, we could see people were terrified. It was spiking on things like, am I going to die if I have this vaccine? Those type of comments. And then when we look to, what actually happened, what we call the outcomes, we know that in the UK, we all got injected. In France and Germany, that take-up of that first vaccine was much, much lower. And actually, my wife is French and both her parents are doctors. And they confirmed to me that French medical facilities had AstraZeneca vaccine sitting in their fridges unused because people were scared. And we could show that there was a link between the confused messaging and the outcome. So comms can have outcomes, can save and claim lives in terms of the impact of our work. So, go and download that report and take a look at it. Of course, those people in France and Germany were holding out for the Pfizer vaccine. Now, I can't quantify how many, if any of them, may have died as a result, but presumably some would have done.
So let's talk about the future of measurement a little bit. There's more mediums that are becoming very popular. There's more places to measure. Yet at the same time, we're not necessarily seeing media share more article-specific metrics or things like that. What kinds of things do you see on the horizon that are going to change the way we look at measurement?
I think that's such a great point, Ian. I see so much disruption coming to that old approach of media content, counts and amounts, measurement. It's losing its relevance at a ever rapidly increasing pace. A lot of the output metrics are becoming less and less meaningful and valid. We've got huge amounts of traffic online. I think Google estimates, this is a couple of years old, it will have changed now, but something like 61% of traffic online is not human. It's different bots and crawlers whizzing around the place. So HITS, as famously said in our industry, is how idiots track success. What it stands for, because it's not a human. It's just a sort of large number that doesn't mean anything. And we've got the rise of different social channels making access to their API either more expensive. So Twitter has taken its pricing from a few dollars for some organizations up to, it's just a blanket get out of bed price now. It begins at 43,000, I think it is, dollars per month. That's to get their API. But then how good is the content that you're getting from Twitter these days when it's so polarized? But we've got all kinds of other places, particularly the Meta channels, where they've locked it down, where LinkedIn isn't sharing a lot of its data because of privacy concerns. But we've also got a rise of new things like what we're doing here today, talking on podcasts, or WhatsApp communities, one of the fastest growing areas where there's just no visibility into who's seeing what where. And I think of it like the old, when we all used to go to offices, and may those days come back soon, like the old water cooler moment, those conversations at the water cooler or the phone call with your mother. This is private stuff. And always was and always will be. So if we want to know how effective we're being with our communication, the counts and amounts of output metrics have to be deprioritized. They're still important. They're the digital breadcrumb trails, if you like, of our activity. They show a link between activity. But we have to move to measuring what we're actually achieving and focusing on that. So what people are thinking and what people are doing as well. And I think it's about collecting what we can, realizing what we can isn't always perfect, and then linking it through to the outtakes and the outcomes. And I would suggest as well that at least we try and be consistent and think of those output metrics a bit like an index. As long as we're consistent with how we collect them, then if they're going up, we're probably doing a bit more stuff. If they're going down, we're probably doing a bit less stuff. But frankly, who cares? What matters is our target audience now thinking something that we wanted them to think or doing something that we wanted them to do?
Are there specific trends that you have your eyes on for 2024 in particular?
Well, look, AI is going to be absolutely huge, isn't it? It's not even a year since ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever it was exploded onto the market. We've already had ChatGPT 4. We've got Sam Altman at OpenAI talking about GPT-5. And said just last week that we will look back in a year's time and we will say that the state of AI today was quaint, which I think when you consider what it can do, the fact that they released, the GPT programming last week and already I think there have been 7,000 different PR related GPT programs released into the GPT market. The explosion of AI is absolutely going to be huge. That's going to mean more tools are going to be created. There's going to be more content. There's going to be an absolute tsunami of content. The Economist had a fantastic special on this back in April, and it talked about not content farms, but whole content ecosystems that we're going to be doing misinformation and disinformation. When we've got a world next year where we've got 40 democracies having an election representing 41% of global GDP and 42% of global population. I think it's that way around with the numbers, but all three of them in the 40s. This is pretty frightening stuff. So the rise of misinformation, disinformation, the rise of content, we're going to get into content battles between almost like the good guys and the bad guys. The one thing that isn't going to scale is going to be our attention. But I think the less sophisticated PR professional is going to do even more counts and amounts because there's going to be more stuff. So they're going to count more stuff. And I think if I can convey a message today, it's resist that urge. Let's focus on the things that actually matter. On top of that, I think there'll be more around influencer marketing. I think influencers are not going away. They're going to get bigger and more people will be doing that. I think there's a bit of a bust on easy influencing. And what do I mean by that? I mean influencers where they charge lots of money and there's no value. And that takes us back to that outtakes and outcomes, working with this influencer actually deliver an organizational goal for us. And I think that with the mainstream media in a really perilous state where it is struggling to monetize, where people are actively avoiding it because the global news situation is so negative that it's creating too much anxiety in us, where the media are happy if they can keep a user on their website for more than 3 minutes. And note I say website, not article, where 4 in 10 of us don't read beyond headlines and pictures. We're just in a sort of vicious circle, I'm terrified to say, of a decline in the media and in truth. So there's some pretty frightening trends there. I think the big one might be around this counts and amounts, and the savvy PR professional will be the one that knows it's not about counting the stuff, it's about measuring what matters.
So it is AMEC Measurement Month. And just before we move on, do you have any other advice for companies when it comes to measurement as they think about 2024?
Yeah, a relentless focus on what it is you're trying to achieve. Focus on outcomes. Don't focus on stuff. No one wants a busy fool. I didn't give you the full 9 yards on how I got where I got, but I began my career in telesales. My first job in 1988, I got paid 50 quid a week basic and then commission. And then after my first week, our boss came into our office and said, sorry, lads, we're not doing very well. Your 50 quid a week's gone. It's just commission from now on. And that taught me a big lesson. It taught me you've got to sell. And that's an outcome, right? It didn't matter if I made 100 calls a day or 150 calls a day. If I didn't sell, I'd just been a busy fool. And I think that's the same for PR and comms today. It's something that I've taken with me through my professional life is it's not about the activity, it's about the result. So my measurement advice is to focus on making sure, you become what you measure, right? So let's measure against our organization objectives. Let's agree them up front. Let's have a proper plan. Let's get out there and crack on with focusing against those objectives. We've got so many tools, so many lovely ways to get to our audiences in new ways now. That's great, but let's focus on what it is we're trying to achieve.
Brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. There'll be a lot more things to count, but you've got to focus on the outcomes. And if you do that, you'll end up going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Our next section is called Smart People, Dumb Questions. And I literally pick questions out of the bag here. My first question, and these are sort of more personal questions. My first question here out of the bag is, what book are you currently reading?
I am reading, just bought it, How to Sell Value Demystified. So it's a book that's published by an AMEC partner and actually a CARMA partner, the Public Relations Communications Association, the PRCA. It's a practical guide for communications agencies. And it's because I have turned over a new leaf this year, which is, and it's something that matters to me as well, is, I'm mid-50s now, and I just feel that we should all be learning all of the time. And so I'm trying to read business books, and that's the latest one I've got. And of course, it's interesting, isn't it? How to sell value. It's not value. It's not activity. It's value that the book title is. So I think that's a good one for our measurement conversation today.
Yes. So value pricing rather than like agencies moving away from sort of paying per hour to actually the value of it. Because it might only take you 5 minutes to do the thing, but it took you 30 years to be able to do it in those five minutes. So that book is by Crispin Manners for this. What's one of the things on your bucket list?
I've been super lucky to have a career that's taken me all over the world, and I've been to incredible places and, met some amazing people, but I've never been to New Zealand. And on my bucket list, when my son's a bit older, I want to take my son. Two things I want to do with my son. One, take him on safari. At the moment, I'm a bit worried that a lion would think he makes a perfect size Scooby snack, and also that he wouldn't remember it. So he's 8 at the moment. So when he's a bit older, take him on a nice safari. And I'd also love to go personally to New Zealand because I've just heard so many great things about it, but never had the opportunity to visit.
Love to go too. But I agree on the safari. Went to Botswana once. It was just brilliant. What's the strangest job that you've ever done?
Ooh, gosh, I'm appalled to admit I have a checkered career and I've done a few. One strange job, I had to unpack day-to-a-page diaries, if you remember them. I mean, they seem very antiquated now. I think my uncle owned a diary company and he bought them in from somewhere or something and had them printed. I think they were for Barclays. Back in the days when bank managers would hand out diaries and they were branded, and they'd forgotten to put in bookmarks. They used to have a ribbon bookmark. So I had to unpack boxes of A4 diaries, open them up, cut up ribbon, stick it in glue, open the spine, stick it down the back of the book, seal it and repack it. And I did that for 6 weeks.
There's a lot of value add in there. I'm sure they appreciated the hand-cut ribbons for each of the data page. Those things, very comforting to have one. What was the first concert that you ever went to?
I mean, I'm afraid I was an 80s boy. I went to Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I went to Duran Duran.
Nice.
My brother smelt his first spliff at Duran Duran. How about that for a memory?
There you go.
I remember saying, "What's that funny smell?" And I said, "It's a spliff." That was, of course, in the days when you could smoke indoors. That was at Wembley, but not the arena, not the stadium. It's at Wembley Arena, which is an indoor venue. Of course, you wouldn't be allowed. And it wasn't my spliff, I should hasten to add. It was some very naughty person behind me. Goodness me. Tom Robinson Band at university. Mm-hmm. He was very good. Imagination, they were good at university.
They were good.
But my favourite band, I can't have all those rubbish bands now without saying my favourite band. It's New Order, and I've seen them a number of times. Well, New Order and The Cure, and I've seen both of them quite a few times.
Yes, I've seen The Cure a few times. They are always brilliant live. Love those. Our next section is called the Fired Up 5. It's our quick fire round. So take it away, Ian.
What do you wish you had known before you got into comms and PR?
How quickly my career would go. I can't believe I'm a 56-year-old git looking back on it, because I still feel like a 24-year-old young man. It's gone very quickly. There's still life in the old dog, but I am feeling like I'm at the wrong end of it. And also how much fun I was going to have. You know, you can be very anxious and worry about things, but it's been a real blast. I've had a lot of fun.
What's the best career advice you were ever given?
People by people was a very early sales training expression that I learned. You know, everyone's got a tool, a gadget, a report, whatever it is that you're selling, report, schmort, portal, schmortal. It doesn't really matter. People buy people, and how important it is never to forget that human touch and to realize that. I think another one was my father when I first started working. I remember him saying to me, he gave, I think it's a Mark Twain quote. And he said, "Well done, son." He said, "You need two things in life, ignorance and confidence." And I looked at him, I thought, what are you talking about? He said, look, basically, he said, just have confidence. He said, doesn't matter if you don't know, just be confident and you'll go far. And I think that's been, again, it's really, we all have a sort of bit of an imposter syndrome. And I think having the confidence to believe in yourself is a really important thing.
What is the tool or gadget, you just mentioned tools and gadgets, that you've recently started using?
Although the listeners are hearing us as voices, we can see each other on our monitors. Mm-hmm. And my latest must-have gadgets are massive monitors. So you two are sitting there very big. And it's because I'm wearing hugely expensive varifocals. I'm still blind as a bat and can't see anything. And it's only getting worse. So I'm now all about big monitors and big letters.
What's the thing you've learned in the last year?
How quickly little boys become little men.
I have two. What tactic are most brands overlooking?
The tactic most brands are overlooking is that they're doing too many bloody tactics and they're not spending enough time on strategy and planning. So the tactic they're doing too much of is tactics, and what they're overlooking is strategic planning, preparation, focusing on what it is that matters.
That's good advice. So, Richard Bagnall, the global co-managing partner of CARMA, thanks for coming on Fired Up. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Email address richard.bagnall@karma.com. You'll find me on LinkedIn just by searching for my name, but I'm Richard Bagnall run together. And on Twitter, or X as we now have to call it, again, Richard Bagnall, and it's NALL at the end. Any of those will work.
Terrific. Thanks for your time today. Enjoyed the conversation. Tell us all about PR measurement, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Morgan and Ian, for having me on the pod. I appreciate it.
Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/fired-up freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.